The Tennis Gambling Podcast on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network is brought to you by Hamburg Fantasy. Go into 25 times your entry with their pick 8. On the promo code SGPN. They're going to special pick and first time deposit offer up to $2 bonus cash on a fantasy promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Rhythm. Rhythm is loaded with a ton of picks for the British Open. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportsgamepodcast.com/rhythm, sportsgamepodcast.com/RITHMM. And welcome, everybody, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast here on the Sports Gambling Podcast Network. It is currently Friday night, roughly 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time on July 19th. I'm your host, always, Scott Reichel, once again going solo for this pod. Should be a fun episode because it is time to get into the semifinals in the 4 ATP events for this past week. We have Bastad, Gstaad, Hamburg, and Newport. So we're going to cover all 8 matches on Saturday. So we're going to go through each of them in order. The order for this particular episode will be Bastad first. We're going to do Gstaad first, then Bastad, then Hamburg, then Newport. So keep that in mind. Before we get into any of that, though, do want to take care of some housekeeping. I want to remind you once again to like, subscribe on YouTube. Also, reminder, don't forget to review the podcast on Spotify or Apple. So no matter how you consume the podcast, you can show support. So appreciate it if you would leave a review. We haven't gotten many reviews lately. Big reason for that's because a lot of people switched over to YouTube, but a review would go a long way. So appreciate it if you take the time to give one out. Plus, a reminder, check out the merch store, because you do have a lot of Tennis Gambling Podcast merch. We have shirts, sweatshirts, and mugs, all high quality, different colors, so a lot of different options. Recommend you getting yourself something there. Also, a reminder to talk about the featured show for SGPN. So the featured show of the week is actually the mothership show. It's going to be the Sports Gambling Podcast, which is getting you ready for college football season with their conference previews. You can find it on YouTube, on Spotify, Apple, wherever you do get your podcasts, or on the SGPN app. So for starters, got to recap what happened on Friday. A ton of matches to recap. 14. We covered all of them. Overall, I think the results were decent. Getting into the actual lock and dog pick recap, though, kept the lock streak rolling as we had a nice winner with Berrettini and Felix over. 22.5 games at minus 139. Never in doubt, you had no breaks in the entire match, which I thought would be kind of a hold fest, and it was exactly that, as Berrettini did win 7-6, 7-6. So really never in doubt. I believe there were no break points in the entire second set, so sweat-free. Nice winner there. For the dog, though, picked up a loss. We had Borges and Skatov over 2.5 sets at plus 140. Didn't happen as Borges killed him, and he won in straight sets. So either way, ended up splitting there. Now, getting into the recap of the quarterfinals, also want to recap how we did with our actual outright picks for the quarters. But I'm going to go through quickly the overall matches that took place on Friday. So for starters, in Hamburg, you saw Baez beat Darderi in 3. You saw Rune get injured. Suarez's durability is a serious problem, and it's going to keep him from winning anything important, at least for Grand Slams. I know he technically won a 1,000 title in Paris a couple years ago, but it feels like Rune is either, I'd say he lacks mental toughness or he lacks proper durability or both, and he ended up quitting when Fees was destroying him 6-4, 4-1 in the second set. Martinez had a crazy match against Cerundolo where he lost the first set 6-1, then he won the second set 6-1, and then he won the third set 6-4, and Zverev beat Zhang in straight sets. Nothing really shocking there. As for the other matches in Bastad, you had Adjakovic, who ended up beating Montero in a fun 3-setter. You saw Tarante beat Baena in 3 sets. Pretty crazy match there, as Baena ended up losing the first set, won the second, then was up a ton. I believe he was up 5-2 in the third set and absolutely choked it, as Tarante ended up winning the last 5 games of the match. So props to Tarante for rallying, and he ended up cashing a nice plus 175 underdog moneyline price. And Borges did beat Skatov in the last match for Bastad. I'm saving one match for last, but there is one match I am skipping. I'll mention that in a second. For Gstaad, you saw Halles beat Heidi in straight sets. Struff did beat Echeverry in 3 sets. Fun match there. Tsitsipas did beat Fognini in straight sets, and Berrettini did beat Felix 7-6, 7-6. As for Newport, you ended up seeing Eubanks beat Vukic in 3, and you ended up seeing Bolt lose to Giron in pretty embarrassing fashion, losing 6-4, 6-1. So the main match, though, I want to recap is the Nadal match, which was an insane all-timer against Navone. 4 hours. The match took 4 hours for a 3-setter, which is kind of unheard of. It has happened before. We have seen longer matches for Nadal in 3-setters, most notably the match against Djokovic on clay about 15 years ago. Point is, though, crazy match. Nadal was on the ropes, down a set. Then he won the second set 7-5, and then you had absolute chaos ensue in the third set, as Nadal did lead 5-2 in the third set, and then absolutely imploded. Ended up getting broken serving for the match at 5-2. Then he got broken again serving for the match at 5-4. Then he broke back at 5-5, and then he ended up holding out to win 7-5 in the final set. But Nadal, at his age, with the amount of injuries he's had and the lack of overall matches that he's played over the last couple of years. Surviving a 4-hour marathon on clay is extremely impressive, and Navone is a very good clay player. It's a good one there for Nadal. It does help that Navone is really not known for his serve, but either way, a win is a win. Crazy match in general. What's even funnier is that there was one combined ace in the entire match that took 4 hours. But Nadal got the job done. Good for him. He said he's going to see how he feels moving forward for the next round. Does have a qualifier in the next round in Adjakovic, so it is a very favorable draw for Nadal to actually make it to a final. He might have to withdraw from doubles, though, because him and Ruud are still together. It would not shock me if he dropped out of doubles. He said he's going to see how he feels. Hopefully he feels good and up to the task for Saturday. But a hell of a match, and that was one of the best matches of the year, and Nadal was on the winning side. Now, to get into the actual recap of our outright picks, don't want to spend too much time on it, but still have to go through it. So to go through the quarter picks for Gstaad, first quarter did not go well. We ended up fading Tsitsipas. We had Medjedovic at 650 and Fognini at 850. Fognini got to the quarterfinals. Unfortunately, Tsitsipas was minus 900, so we couldn't hedge out of it, and we ended up seeing Fognini lose in straight sets. The swing and a miss there for the first quarter. Second quarter, though, ended up working out. We had Berrettini at plus 140 and Felix at plus 160. Automatic winner there in the second quarter. Third quarter, same story. We had Echeverry and Struff both at plus 162. So automatic winner, and Struff did get there in the end. Fourth quarter, though, was our biggest winner of the actual event. We had Humbert at a plus 105. That lost, but we had Hallis at plus 750, and he got there as he had a pretty favorable draw into the quarterfinal. And he ended up beating Heidi in a straight set. So definitely a nice win there with plus 750. For the outrights, we have nobody left except Berrettini at plus 600. Moving on to Hamburg. First quarter ended up having Zverev at minus 150 by himself. That was as simple as you can imagine. Second quarter didn't work out. Took Arnaldi and Papiron. That did not work at all. Third quarter, though, we had Baez and Darderi. They faced off against each other, automatic winner, but Baez won at plus 240. And for the fourth quarter, we had Rune and Fees, automatic winner, but Fees did cash with the plus 450. So overall, a pretty solid pair of tournaments there with quarter bets. Decent amount of long shots hit, and we've definitely made money over the course of the quarters. Now, the problem was for the other events, we actually did not have any quarter odds for Bastad, and we ended up swinging and missing for our outright pick, so that did not go well there at all in Bastad. For Newport, though, can't complain. No quarter odds, but we do have Giron and we do have Opelka at 80-1. Giron at 750, so there is a chance we automatically win if Giron and Opelka win on Saturday. That way you just have a matchup between two of our outrights in the final, which would be very cool. But we have Giron at 750 and Opelka at plus 8,000. That's the dream. Hopefully it gets there. Knock on wood, and we'll see how Opelka does on Saturday and hopefully on Sunday. Nothing else to really recap there. Went through all the matches. Now it's time to get into the actual preview of the Saturday matches. But before into that, do want to remind you once again that we are brought to you by Monarch Fantasy because they just launched their college football best ball product. First place wins $20K. Plus a higher or lower pick 'em. Pick 8 allows you to have the opportunity to win 30-25 times your entry. You can now use specials and boost on all flex entries. And for pick 8s, it's a bit tricky now because you have no WNBA for the next month or so. But baseball's back, so you might want to look for some potential options there. Also, a reminder, use the promo code SGPN to claim a special getting first-time deposit offer up to $5 bonus cash on a fantasy promo code SGPN. We're also brought to you by Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions. Circuit Sports is back with Circuit Survivor and Circuit Millions, giving away $16 million in guaranteed prizes. And of course, Circuit contests have no rake. Circuit Millions, pick 5 NFL teams ATS each week and compete for $6 million or survive the NFL Gauntlet with NFL Survivor to claim the $10 million prize. Sign up in person at Circuit Sports between now and September 7th and use a proxy to play from anywhere. We even have a deal with footballcontestproxy.com to save you $50 with promo code SGP. Don't have a trip booked yet for Las Vegas before football. Ultimate Contest Weekend's a great time to go. Hang out with Ryan and Sean and enjoy some of the open bar events at the World's Best Sportsbook from August 22nd through the 24th. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished recapping Friday's action and our quarter picks for the events. Now it's time to get into the 8 semifinal matches that we are going to see on Saturday. So starting off in order, mentioned it before, we are going to start with Gstaad as the first tournament, starting at about 5 a.m. Eastern Time. For this one, you have Hallis against Struff. Struff's a pretty big favorite, about minus 255, and you have Hallis at around plus 215. For the game spread, you have Struff minus about 2.5, and you have Hallis at around plus 2.5. And for the over-under, you have 23.5 or a very juiced 22.5 at about minus 150. For that, they face off one time. It was on hard court last year, and Struff did win in 3 sets. So he did not cover, by the way, as Halles did win the first set. I believe it was 6-1, and then lost the final 2 sets 6-3, 6-3 in Indian Wells. That was on hard court. This is on clay, so tough to really draw conclusions. But the point is, Halles has been solid here, as he has had a pretty long ride to the semis as he went through qualifying, beat Fonio in 3, beat Moreno in straight sets, beat Gasquet in straight sets, beat Klein in 3, beat Heidi in straight sets. As for Struff, he had a bunch of breakers start the event, breakers against Ramos Vinolas, breakers against Reddy, and then he ended up beating Echeverry in 3 in the match on Friday. So I think Struff should be a pretty big favorite based on his overall talent and his overall reputation, because he did win a clay title this year, and we already know that he's definitely a top 30 talent. Halles has been pretty streaky over the last couple of years. He's in good form, though. It's why we backed him in this event to win the quarter, because he looked good in Wimbledon, and we thought that momentum-wise, he would look sharp in this event. The issue that I have with Halles for this matchup is that he really hasn't played anybody in the event, because he ended up going through qualifying. Gasquet is about to retire. That was a close match. Klein is more of a challenger-level player, still a good win, I guess, in 3. And Heidi was a Cinderella run. So Halles really hasn't played anybody, and Struff did end up beating Ramos Vinolas, who I know is past his prime, still a solid clay player. Believe he was a former champion here, I think. And he ended up beating Echeverry, who's still a solid clay player as well. So I do acknowledge Struff has had the tougher competition, and he has looked a bit sharper in the process. But I do think 255 is too big. I think Halles can actually win this match, and I think that his overall skill level is closer to Struff than people want to pretend that it currently is. I think Struff's better. I'm not saying he's not. 255, though, I think Halles is being disrespected here. I'd probably have Struff as a favorite. I'd probably have him like minus 160, minus 170. But minus 255, that I can't agree with. For value alone, give me Halles. I think he's got a shot to win the match. I think it might go 3. I don't mind the over in this one. Maybe over 2.5 sets, like plus 130. But I think for the sake of it, give him the long shot here and the over. I think Halles can make it interesting, and that'll be my pick for that matchup. Moving on to the second matchup, you have Berrettini against Tsitsipas, which should be the best matchup for Saturday. For this one, you have Tsitsipas at about minus 149. You have Berrettini at plus 129. For the game spread, minus 1.5 for Tsitsipas, plus 1.5 for Berrettini. And the over-under in games is around 24.5. For set wagering, you have, by the way, Halles was plus 1.5 sets, minus 145. For reference, and Struff was minus 1.5 for plus 115. But for this one, you have Tsitsipas in straight sets at around plus 175. Berrettini in straight sets is around plus 300, and the over 2.5 sets is about plus 125. Now, this might surprise you, but Tsitsipas has owned Berrettini in the head-to-head. So even though I gave up Berrettini to win the event, I will admit is not a great draw for him, because Tsitsipas is 6-0 lifetime. In fact, I believe it is 5-0 in matches played. There was a walkover in the Australian Open, so technically 5-0 in matches that were actually played. However, they've only faced off one time on clay. That was in Rome in 2021, and Tsitsipas did win that one in straight sets. So not many clay meetings, but Tsitsipas has had Berrettini's number on a regular basis, and I think he's definitely worthy of being favored in this matchup. And the Berrettini is a former champion. He's definitely solid, and I do think that you are looking at a spot where Berrettini can make it interesting, where Berrettini might be able to win a set and maybe the match. But when the head-to-head is 5-0 in matches played, I have a hard time picking against you. It's not as dramatic as Tsitsipas against de Minaur, for example, where it's like 12-2, and that I feel like is an automatic Tsitsipas play. I think I am going to lean to Tsitsipas, though. Berrettini's been solid, but I do acknowledge that his overall return of serve has not been amazing in this event, and Tsitsipas, I think, should generate more breaks in this, or at least break chances in this matchup. Tsitsipas, though, we know is a very solid clay player. The issue is consistency. I was willing to fade it fresh off of Wimbledon, and he's looked good. So Tsitsipas has shut me up. He's looked pretty good. Berrettini has looked very solid, but I will point out that he has had a couple of dicey sets that have come down to breakers, so I do think that Berrettini is a bit more vulnerable than odds makers want to admit, and I think Tsitsipas being favored does make sense. I think Tsitsipas should arguably be a bigger favorite. I think he should be about minus 160, in my opinion. So the line isn't that far off at minus 149 in my eyes, but I am going to lean to the favorite here. I think Tsitsipas is the better clay player. I think he's the better player in the head-to-head. Being 5-0 in those matchups. Give me Tsitsipas on the money line in that one. Lean to the over, but at 24.5, you basically need at least 3 sets or back-to-back tie breaks, essentially, and I have a hard time fully wanting to bet that. I took the Felix over 22.5 because 22.5, you can at least get there with a 6-4. You don't need two separate sets with at least 12 games in it. So for that reason, I'm going to lean to the over. Not going to play it, though. Give me the money line for Tsitsipas instead. Moving on to the next tournament in Bastad, you have Nadal, who is favored against Djokovic, and he is about minus 296. For Djokovic, you have about plus 246. For the spread, you have Nadal minus 3.5. For the underdog, you have plus 3.5 at plus money. Over-unders around 21.5. Nadal in straight sets is minus 105. Djokovic is about plus 1.5 at minus 125. Match to go to 3 sets is plus 150. Now, Nadal is in a very weird spot because, of course, he's very up there in years, and he just came off of an absolute war. He played 4 hours at his age and has no day off in between. So when he says, I'll see how I feel right after the match, not exactly what you want to hear, but it's the reality of the situation. He does have to pace himself with the Olympics up next, and we do know that he wants to represent his country proudly in France. So that being the case, I expect him to be smart with his decision-making when it comes to playing this match or not. Personally, I think he's going to play. I think he's going to punt doubles. I think him and Ruud are probably going to end up withdrawing from the event. It would not shock me. I don't see Nadal playing both matches, so I think he's going to have to pick one. I think he'll pick the singles run, so I think Nadal will play. Now, do I think he's going to look sharp? Maybe not, because fatigue could be a serious issue. Djokovic, though, has had a bunch of matches, too. He did go to 3 sets against Montero on Friday as well, so he had a big marathon, too. Not 4 hours, but still a long tournament run, as he also had to go to 3 sets against Kotov the round prior and went through qualifying. So he has played a lot of matches, 5 matches to be exact, so fatigue could be an issue for both guys, but I think Nadal's going to win. I think he's earned the benefit of the doubt, especially on clay, and I do think that he will be able to get the job done. Will it be convincing? That's the part that I'm not sure about. Because Nadal's serve has been very underwhelming, at least at his current age, so it doesn't generate many free points anymore from the first serve. And with that being the case, I do think Djokovic can break sometimes in this matchup. Now, I think Nadal's obviously better in all aspects, but off a 4-hour marathon, I tend to fade veterans off of back-to-back spots with a lack of rest. And Nadal really needs the rest. So it's not exactly a great spot for Nadal. I'm going to pick him to win. I think a Djokovic can actually keep it competitive. I think plus 4.5 games might be intriguing. I'm not going to bet it, but I do think Nadal might struggle at times with his fatigue in this matchup. So I think that the value is not really there. There's too much uncertainty for me. People are going to blindly take Nadal in straight sets because he's Nadal and he was able to survive Navone. He was really on the ropes, and the serve is still not as effective as it used to be, especially on clay. I think he's going to win, but I really don't want to bet it. Too many question marks with the overall fatigue, and playing 4 hours and then playing the day after is just an absurd scheduling spot. So I'm going to pass on Nadal. I think he's going to win, but I will lean to the dog here, plus the 4.5 games in principle. Probably going to have no action, though, on that matchup. Now, moving on to the next match in Bastad, you have Borges against Tirante. So 2 relative Cinderellas making it to the semis. Borges is minus 155. You see Tirante at about plus 135. Borges has looked solid in the event so far. Looking at his overall path, he had a pretty easy win against Skatov in the quarters. Besides that matchup, though, he had a 3-setter against Rocha, straight sets win against Pellegrino, so not much competition, but he still has been solid in the event, only dropping 1 set. Tirante's had a war in basically every round. Beat Baena in 3, beat Rublev in 3, and beat Faria in 3. So I do think that Baena is a solid win. It was off of a clay challenger title, was in good form, and he came back from 5-2 down in the final set to win. Impressive comeback there. Rublev, I know he's been a head case, but still beat a top 10 guy in the world. Good win there. And then he beat Faria, who's a relative unknown, but pretty talented young Portuguese player. So I can't really complain too much about Tirante's path. I think I am going to lean to Tirante. Maybe I'm just anti-Borges, and I do recognize how well he played against Skatov, but I really don't want to lay 155 here. I think that Tirante is a guy that's very talented, mostly in the challenger level on clay, but I know that he's comfortable here, and when you're able to beat Baena in good form and you're able to beat Rublev, I think you're dangerous. And I think that Borges, even though he does have solid overall power shots from both wings, I think Tirante is more comfortable on clay, and I think he has a better clay resume. So that being the case, I am going to lean to the dog here at plus 135. Do like the over, though. Tirante's gone to 3 sets in every round here, and I think you're going to see him, once again, be involved in a marathon. So it might be a topsy-turvy match, maybe jumping in alive to get you a better price, but I do think that Borges will win a set, and then in my opinion, I think he'll lose in 3. So give me a marathon. I don't mind the over, and I think you're looking at a spot where I think Tarante is alive at this current price. I see in the comment section, by the way, that Cayetano agrees that Fede Nadal might be the move. 4 hours for a guy his age is absolutely insane. And just watching the match itself, it was a grueling 4 hours. Every rally was like 20 shots. It was insane to watch. Great overall content. But for Nadal, that was definitely rough on his body, and we'll see how he looks. I would have faded him blindly, probably as the lock play, if it was against anybody that was not a random qualifier. But with that being the case, I'm going to pass instead. So I do think, once again, Nadal's in a pretty tough scheduling spot. We'll see how he looks, or if he chooses to withdraw from the event entirely. Moving on, though, to the next tournament, we have Hamburg, where we have one really competitive match on paper and one that should be very lopsided. So for the competitive one, you have Fils taking on Baez. Fils is actually favored, which kind of surprised me, at minus 138, and Baez is plus 118. For the spread, you have minus 1.5 Fils, plus 1.5 Baez. And the over-under is around 22.5 games. For the set total, you have over 2.5 sets at plus 120, plus 130 if you shop around. For set spread, Fils minus 1.5, plus 175. Baez minus 1.5 sets is plus 275. Now, Baez, we know, based on resume, is the much better clay player. However, Baez has not looked that comfortable so far in Hamburg. He did make it to the semis, and of course, we have him to win the event. So, knock on wood, hopefully he wins. But Baez went to 3 against Darderi, went to 3 against Lajovic, and he ended up beating Kempfer in straight sets. Fils, though, beat Rune in basically straight sets as Rune got injured and quit when he was going to lose in straight sets. Beat De Geer in straight sets, and he beat Munar in 3. Did lose the first set, though, so he has won basically 6 straight sets in this event. Now, Baez has been struggling, but I'm not going to roast him too hard because Darderi is a very solid clay player. So is Lajovic. Lajovic has been around for a long, long time. We saw him beat Djokovic on clay. I think it was a year ago. He does have a clay title or 2. Not going to roast him too hard. Lajovic is a very tough player on clay in any given day, and he was able to outlast him. So I do think, for the sake of this matchup, I understand Fils has looked like the better player, and I understand that he dominated against Rune on Friday. This line feels so disrespectful to me. Baez already won a 500 on clay this year. We know that how successful he has been on clay in his career. Plus money against Fils, really? I just don't agree with this price. I think that you could argue it's minus 110 apiece, maybe a slight favorite for Fils at like minus 120. Minus 138, like that I just don't agree with. I think Baez is capable of pulling off the upset. I think he's in line for a good showing here. I'm going to lean to Baez, but I am picking the over. I think Fils has a lot of firepower, and that's how he's going to have to win. He's going to have to hit the ball through Baez. I think Baez is too solid in the long rally game, and I think that his overall quickness will really just force Fils into going for broke on a lot of points, trying to hit a lot of shots past him, going for the thinnest of margins, and trying to hit a bunch of winners, which can go well or poorly for Fils. Either the unforced errors are going to show up, or the winners are going to show up. Give me a mix of both. I like the over, but I do think Baez is more trained in the clay actual wars based on how many he's had over the years and how many titles he's won. Fils has not won many titles in his career. He did win a clay title in his home country, actually. I think that's basically it, actually. I think he only has 1 title, so I quickly want to pull that up, but I do trust Baez a bit more in what I think should be a very competitive matchup. Give me the over, though. I think these guys are going to kill each other, and I think you're looking at what should be a very fun first semifinal match here in Hamburg. Now, moving on to the next matchup. To be honest, not going to spend much time on it because Zverev's minus 900 against Martinez. And I was right, by the way. The only title that Fils has won was on clay, and that was in France last year, as he ended up winning in, I want to say it was Lyon, but I'm trying to remember where it was. It was in, sorry, just pulling up the ATP website for a second. Sorry if you already know the answer, but it was in, sorry, just trying to pull it up. He won in Lyon. I was right. So he has 1 clay title. I like the over. I see them killing each other. As for this matchup, though, with Zverev and Martinez, props to Martinez, though, who was able to rally against Cerundolo, and he had a nice showing in the first round against Arnaldi. He's had a pretty fun run in general. Solid clay player. Did make a clay final earlier this year. Zverev, though, is the, of course, home country guy, as he is from Germany, defending champion. He's minus 900. I'm taking Zverev. Like, I'm not going to spend much time on this. I think Martinez is a great story, not a good enough server. I think Zverev, besides the one set against Gaston, where it was the controversial double bounce that went against him, I think he's looked very solid. I think Zhang's a solid clay player, and Zverev beat him comfortably. I see a similar story here. I think Martinez will not be able to hold consistently enough with his inconsistent serve, and Zverev is a very solid returner. Give me Zverev to win comfortably. Nothing really else to add. The problem is Zverev in straight sets is minus 205. Really nothing to actually take in this match, but we have Zverev to win the whole thing, so hopefully he ends up converting. So give me Zverev. Not going to spend much more time on that one. Moving on to Newport, we have a lot of Americans in the semis. In fact, it is all Americans, as we have 4 Americans facing off for a title. First matchup, you have Mickelson against Opelka. Of course, we are shamelessly rooting for Opelka because we have him to win the event at plus 8,000. So hopefully he gets it done. I believe he's the highest, or I should say the lowest ranked player to ever make an ATP semi. I think he's ranked 1,187, which is something insane. It's the all-time record, and we have money on it. So hopefully he ends up converting for another 2 matches. Now, Mickelson's been solid. He has not dropped a set yet in this event. Opelka's had a bunch of marathons, as Opelka, in his first tournament back, has really not had the easiest road, as every single match has been an absolute war, but he's been very solid in the third set, and that's how he's been able to get by. So to go through the actual path here, Opelka, by the way, is 1,188. So I was off by 1. It is the worst ranking ever for an ATP semifinalist, which I find pretty cool. You saw Mickelson, though, beat Cressy in straight sets, and he beat Kovacevic in straight sets, all by the scoreline of 6-4, 6-4. As for Opelka, 3 sets against Lestienne, 3 sets against Manarino, and 3 sets against McDonald. So good showing by him. But I do think Mickelson is a really tough challenge for Opelka because Mickelson has the length to get a racket on a lot of Opelka serves. And if that's going to be the problem for Opelka, he kind of needs to put points away early. I think he's actually looked decent with his rally game in this tournament, but we know that overall, he's not a very good rallier by any means. He kind of needs the first serve to be just on fire to win matches. And I do think that even though Mickelson might not be able to get many return winners by any means, I do think he can get enough balls in play to at least force Opelka to rally in his service games. And if that's the case, I really don't like the matchup for Opelka. Mickelson, do I think he's a great player? No. However, he did make the Newport final last year. He lost to Manarino, but he did beat Isner in the semis last year. Now, Isner, I know, is past his prime, but the point is, I do think Mickelson has experience beating elite servers on this particular court, and I do think that he will look pretty sharp, even though I have Opelka at plus 8,000, and I automatically am rooting for him to win. I do think Mickelson's going to win. The day off, though, does help Opelka because he has time to rest to prepare for the semifinal, as he had to go to 3 sets each the first 3 rounds, but he was one of the quarterfinal matches on Thursday, so he had the day off on Friday, which is pretty clutch for him. But I am going to go with Mickelson. I think he's in better form, and I think that his overall serve should still be effective, despite not being the best, because Opelka is really not a great returner. So I do think that Mickelson will do enough in the return games to force some difficult holds for Opelka. I think Opelka might blink a couple times, and I think that Mickelson will find a way to win in this matchup. Maybe it goes 3, but give me a competitive match, which I think Mickelson will end up winning. Moving on to the next matchup between Americans, you have Eubanks against Giron. Giron had a very easy win against Bolt. Eubanks had a war against Vukic, who had kind of owned him in the head-to-head. Match went 3 sets, was competitive, but Eubanks ended up outlasting him in the tiebreak in the final set. As for the actual money line, Giron minus 188, you have Eubanks at plus 163. For the spread, you have minus 2.5 for Giron, you have plus 2.5 for Eubanks. Over-under is around 22.5 or 23.5 games. For the head-to-head, by the way, over 2.5 sets in this one is around plus 125. So Eubanks is 1-0 in the head-to-head. They faced off in Indian Wells in 2019. Eubanks did win in straight sets. Does it mean anything? Not really. It was about 5 years ago on hard court, so I'm kind of tossing it out. Now, Eubanks has, to his credit, looked pretty good. He's been involved in some marathons, though. Went to 3 against Eubanks, 3 against Vukic, and 3 against Quinn. So a couple of tough matches. Vukic, I thought, was in okay form, and we know Giron's better than Quinn by a mile, so we'll see how Giron looks in this matchup. Beat Pair in 3. Lost the first set, though, then came back, and he got a little bit kind of bailed out by the weather, and then he ended up beating Bolt in straight sets. I think Giron's the better player, but I do think minus 180 and change is pretty steep here because Eubanks' serve has translated well to the courts in Newport, and I think that Giron, based on his overall size, might struggle to actually break in this matchup. I think he'll break maybe a couple of times, but Giron's not an amazing server in general, so Eubanks might have some chances. I think I'm going to lean to the over in this one. For value, I might actually lean to Eubanks at a decent plus money price. I'd have Giron like minus 150. I think minus 188 is way too high, so I am going to lean to Eubanks, but I am going to lean to the over. I see a marathon ensuing here, maybe a break or two, but I am going to lean to the over in that one. I see Bill asking if I'm hedging against Opelka. I think I kind of have to. I picked Mickelson to win this match, so I'm not going to kind of let it ride for the sake of letting it ride. I might not full hedge it. I might hedge it partially. Point is, though, I think Mickelson's going to win, so I do think that I have to at least try to cover my bases to some degree. I'm not going to hedge it down the middle 50-50 because if Opelka wins, then I'm screwed because then I'm down 40 units and I have, or down, 40, I'm down half the profit I would be getting, and I still have to potentially hedge again for the final. So I might hedge a little bit, maybe 10. So if I lose that one, I still have 70 carried over. We'll see what happens, but I think for this one, I am going to potentially hedge with Mickelson to get the job done in that matchup. See Cayetano roasting Strundalo for screwing his future parlay. Martinez won. Yeah, at the end of the day, Cerundolo is a head case. It's why I don't back him in anything. Props to Martinez for winning, but I think Zverev's going to beat him. So for this matchup, though, give me Eubanks for the price, and I do think the over 2.5 sets is a pretty solid option at around plus 125. That's going to wrap it up, though, for the semifinal matches. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks. But before we get into that, to remind me once again that we are brought to you by Rhythm because they have a lot of great golf options for you for the British Open. British Open is halfway through right now, and if you're not checking out the AI picks and props on Rhythm, then you're missing out, not just for outright winners, but they also have picks for top 5, top 10, and top 20. Use their AI Caddy for some great AI actual data insights. You can also customize your own golf betting model using Rhythm's tools. Claim your 7-day free trial today by going to sportscampodcast.com's Rhythm, sportscampodcast.com/RITHMM. Welcome back, everyone, to the Tennis Gambling Podcast. Just finished previewing all 8 semifinal matches taking place on Saturday. Now it's time for the lock and dog picks. For the lock, coincidentally segueing into Bill's message in the comments, I am going to go with Mickelson as my lock at minus 138. Mickelson, I just think is the better player, and I think he's looked very sharp in this event. Kovacevic, I know, is kind of underwhelming, or at least he has not made the leap yet to the ATP Tour. Still a tricky player, and I do think that he has a lot of firepower. Mickelson handled him pretty well, and I thought Mickelson looked pretty sharp in the first round as well in this event. But I was skeptical of how he would look. I thought last year was kind of a fluke run. He proved me wrong, as he was able to win the first 2 matches without dropping a set. I think Cressy is actually pretty good prep for his matchup against Opelka. Excuse me, not as many double faults, but still a solid first serve. Mickelson, though, really dominated the second serve return points against Cressy, and I do see a similar story here against Opelka. So Opelka might need to actually serve like 65-70% in order to win this match, but if it dips, I do think Mickelson can capitalize off of Opelka's second serve. Opelka, though, is still not a great returner. I think Mickelson should be able to limit the unforced errors. It's one thing he's good at. He's very good at keeping the ball in play, and I think Opelka is not exactly solid in that same area. I think Mickelson will be able to win the majority of the long rallies, and I think that eventually Opelka will blink in a couple of service games, give Mickelson to get the job done. Mickelson made the final last year. Here he's very comfortable, not dropped a set yet, and Opelka is still playing his first ATP event in about 2 years, and he went to 3 sets in the first 3 matches. Yes, he had a day off of rest, but I do question how he will look if Mickelson pushes him to the brink again. I think 138 is a good price. Give Mickelson here at minus 138 as my lock. For my dog, I am going to go back to the Baez and Fees match in Hamburg. Give me the over 2.5 sets at plus 130. Baez has dropped at least 1 set in 8 of his last 9, and Fees has dropped at least 1 set in 6 of his last 8. Now, Fees has looked good as tournament has gone on, but Baez is a very dangerous clay player. I also think for a matchup, it's not the greatest matchup for Fees because he is going to showcase a lot of firepower. Baez, though, can track down every ball, and I do think that Fees might end up seeing an unforced error count steadily rise throughout the match, or maybe he'll short circuit a bit from either wing, and Baez might be able to force enough unforced errors to actually steal a set or 2. But I see a marathon here. I think it's a close matchup. The money line's close. I see it being a war. So give me the over 2.5 sets at plus 130. So once again, my picks for the semis here on 4 Saturday's matches. For the lock, I'm going to go with Mickelson on the money line at minus 138. And for my dog, I am going to go with Baez and Fees over 2.5 sets at plus 130. That's going to wrap it up. A reminder, we're back once again for the final in all 4 events tomorrow. So check out for keep your eyes open for Saturday, as we're going to have an episode tomorrow night for the 4 finals. Until next time, find me on Twitter at Reichel Radio. Find me on the NBA show. Find me on the WNBA show, and find me on the MLB show as well. Until next time, good luck to all of you and all of your bets. Bye, everyone.